Hi, my name is Allegra, I am 27 years old, and if someone had told me a week ago that everything would change so quickly and irrevocably, I probably would have grinned with slight irony and pretended not to believe it, because in my life, despite all the internal storms and unresolved memories, in recent years there has been a fragile, but still established routine exactly until that very morning, 3 days ago, when my father died of a heart attack right here, in his office, at the massive mahogany desk that he once brought from California, arguing that a real man should work at real furniture, and so it was. One minute he was alive, bent intently over the plans for yet another construction project, always with the excessive care and attention to detail that made his firm almost legendary among contractors, and the next he was gone, and the air in the room seemed to have grown heavier, as if life itself had leaked out with him through the barely noticeable crack of an open window. The paramedic who arrived 27 minutes after the call said that it all happened quickly, almost like lightning, and perhaps that should have reassured me, given me some dubious relief from the knowledge that he was not in pain. But in reality all I felt was a cold emptiness that could not be filled with words of condolence or covered with the thick fabric of organization that I immediately wrapped myself in like armor. I organized everything myself: the funeral, the flowers, the service in the small Protestant church where my parents had once been married, the cemetery plot and the shady alley by the eastern fence. Every little thing, every detail, from the choice of orchestral composition to the inscription on the tombstone, because Dad always said that it is not only the deeds that are important, but also how they look, and if you bury a person, then do it with dignity, beautifully, as if he were a king, and not just a building contractor from the suburbs. Dad had money, he earned a lot and wisely, so I could afford to do everything as it should be, as he himself would have wished, and, perhaps, even better. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. His business partners came to the funeral, the tired-eyed, calloused-handed men with whom he had spent years building houses all over town, and each of them, one by one, told me how reliable he had been, how honest, how he had helped them through tough times when banks were closing loans and customers were disappearing without a trace, how he had given them steady work because a word is a word, Al, he had once said. If you promise, you do it, even if it's at a loss. His friends from the golf club came, too, the same ones with whom he played every Saturday, not so much for the sport as for the conversation and the sense of belonging to something bigger, to a community of men where you could just be a man, not someone's boss or supplier. Even some of the construction workers came to pay their respects, guys in cheap suits and poorly steamed shirts whom I barely knew but who stood at a distance and looked at the casket with genuine sorrow, as if someone very personal, important, real had passed away. The service was pleasant. The pastor, an elderly man with a gentle voice and wrinkles like cracks in an old rock, spoke of my father's generosity, his love for his family, the deep humanity he carried through his life. Well, what was left of his family? Just me. Grandma had died many years ago, and she was perhaps the only person who really mattered to Dad after Mom left, because her departure was not just a betrayal, it was an explosion after which much collapsed inside. Although on the outside everything continued to look normal, I was standing by the grave, wearing the black coat my father had given me for my last birthday, watching the coffin being lowered, the earth slowly beginning to swallow the wooden box, when someone called my name. Allegra. I turned around and froze, because in front of me stood a woman whose face had once been closer to me than any other, but now seemed alien, a faded reflection of the one I remembered from my childhood. There she was, my mother, standing about 10 meters away from me with a man I didn't know and 3 children I had never seen before. The eldest looked about 16, thin, with a closed gaze. The youngest was about 10, with disheveled hair and hands hidden in his pockets, and they were all dressed in dark clothes, as if they really had come to say goodbye. I hadn't seen her for 20 years, ever since she disappeared from my life. As if she had fallen into a black hole. She looked older, of course. Her hair was shorter and darker, her face was wider, her body was plump, but it was definitely her, and my heart, which was already ready for grief, suddenly sank from an old, almost forgotten pain. "What are you doing here?" I asked, and my voice was cold, hard, like ice in an April river. "How did you even know he was dead?" "I never told you," she said. Her relatives had told her, and at that moment the man next to her, tall, balding, in an ill-fitting suit, put his hand on her shoulder. as if to say, I'm with you, don't be afraid. He must have been the same lover she'd once run away with, leaving me alone in the house that still smelled of my dad's leather jacket and my mom's makeup. The 3 children stood behind her, looking confused, not knowing where to look, as if they were caught in someone else's drama they didn't want to be a part of. I couldn't believe she dared. But before I could finish the thought, she told me she hadn't invited me to the funeral because she didn't think she had the right. He was my husband once, she said. I laughed. Right there, at my father's grave, your husband? You left him 20 years ago, you left us both. The memories came flooding back. I was 7 when it happened. Dad had gone away on a business trip, looking at some property upstate, just for 2 days, and at the time it had seemed like a small thing, a normal adult trip, because he was away a lot, on business, to meetings, to construction sites, and he always came back for dinner, bringing something funny, a stick of gum from a gas station, a napkin with the logo of the hotel he was staying at, a tiny bottle of shampoo as a souvenir. That day, he hugged me, kissed my forehead, promised he'd be back soon, and walked out, closing the heavy front door quietly behind him. Mom stood by the window, watching his car pull out of the driveway, and there was something strange in her eyes then, something that I, a 7-year-old girl, couldn't explain, but now, years later, I understand. Determination. A few minutes later, she disappeared into the bedroom, and I heard closet doors creaking, things falling, suitcases slamming. I asked her where she was going. She leaned toward me and, without looking me in the eye, said, Mom needs to go away for a while, you stay here, Dad will be back soon. I didn't understand why she would take so much stuff with her if it was only for a while, but I believed her. At 7, you generally believe adults, especially those you love. She wrote a note, put it on the kitchen table, grabbed her bags and walked out, without looking back, without saying goodbye, just left, as if she were going out for bread, and not from the life of her own daughter. She left me alone in a big empty house for 2 long, sticky, silent days, full of fear, silence, and some kind of instinctive abandonment that even adults can't articulate. I was scared to death. I ate cereal for breakfast and lunch because I didn't know how to cook anything else. The stove seemed scary and dangerous to me. Like the whole house when no one was there, I watched TV, pretending that everything was fine, and kept waiting for my mother to come back, because I thought, well, she couldn't just leave like that. I kept hoping that she would realize that she had forgotten something important, like me, and come back, but she didn't. When Dad finally walked into the house, tired and wind-beaten, he saw me sitting on the couch in the same clothes I'd been wearing for 2 days, and I ran to him, hugged him as tightly as I could, and said through my tears, Mom's gone. He didn't immediately understand what I meant, but when he saw the note on the kitchen table, he read it silently, turned pale, then crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, as if it were something dirty and humiliating. Your mom is gone, he said out loud, not to me, more to himself, and there was no anger or despair in those words, but some icy sense of betrayal. It all happened quickly. He called his lawyer, the paperwork was prepared. My mother was supposed to show up for a divorce and custody hearing but never showed up, and the judge, without hesitation, awarded my father full custody and terminated her parental rights. That's how simple, official, and irrevocable she disappeared from our lives. Later, when I was older, Dad told me that Mom had an affair with a guy from her office, some mediocre accountant or purchasing specialist. It doesn't matter. The main thing is that he was her way out, her escape, and they planned everything in advance, secretly, cowardly, waiting for the moment when he left so they could run away together. And now, 20 years later, she stands at his grave, next to her beloved, the same one, and with 3 children whom she gave birth to, raised, loved, and behaves as if she has the right to be here, among people grieving for the man she betrayed. Allegra, these are your brothers and sisters, she said, and in her voice, contrary to expectations, there was neither remorse nor embarrassment, only some strange expectation, as if I should immediately melt, embrace everyone, forgive everything. She pointed to the children. This is Romeo, he is 16, Sarah is 13, and little Matteo is 10. I looked at them, at these children who were strangers to me, at their faces full of wary curiosity, and I realized that they probably did not even know who I was, why their mother was suddenly taking them to the funeral of a man they had never seen. I don't care, I said, because I could not and did not want to feel anything else, because all the pain had long ago hardened, had become a stone that could not be moved by words. I turned away from her, walked past her without touching her, without holding her gaze, walked to my car without turning around, without responding to her voice that rang in the air like a rusty bell. Allegra. Allegra. I had nothing to say to her. She had made her choice when I was a child and needed her most, and now she would have to live with that choice, with its consequences, with the shadow she had brought upon herself. As I drove home, images of the last 20 years flashed through my head, as if someone were leafing through an old, worn album of memories. My dad and I had made it. It had been very difficult at first. He was devastated, withdrawn, working himself to the point of exhaustion so as not to think, not to feel, not to remember. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, my father's mother, whom he had invited to live with us so that someone would be close to me. My grandmother became an island for me, a safe haven, a person who loved without conditions. Meanwhile, my father built his business, day after day, brick after brick, putting all his anger, pain, unexpressed tears into it. He began to receive large contracts. He began to be respected in the business community for his work, for his integrity. We moved to a large house in the best area, and although there were neighboring families, dinners with partners, cocktails on the veranda, he never married. Women tried to be close, but he kept his distance. You are my family, he told me. He paid for my college, business administration, as he himself had once dreamed of, and when I graduated, he bought me an apartment. I got a good job, but I did not have to work. After my grandmother died, I inherited her house, sold it, invested the money, and now I could live on the interest, but I didn't want to sit back. I liked the feeling that I was doing something. And now he's gone, I'm alone. Well, not quite alone. He left me everything, the business, the house, the cars, the money. I found the will in his desk, in the same drawer where he kept his important papers. It was simple and clear: everything goes to Allegra, and I'm sure Mom found out about it somehow, not because she was sad, but because she wanted to see what she could get out of it. A few days had passed since the funeral, and I tried to return to some semblance of normal life, if, of course, one can talk about normality at all in a situation where all familiar reality collapses like a house of cards under the weight of one irreversible event, because normality, as it turned out, is a deeply relative thing, especially when your world has been turned upside down, and familiar rituals like a cup of morning coffee or the sound of footsteps on the stairs no longer bring comfort, but only evoke painful associations. I had to deal with issues that I had only heard about until now, with papers, with inheritance, with taxes, with the formalities that are inevitable when a loved one passes away. I immersed myself in the business side of the loss, because otherwise the pain would have eaten me up from the inside, and in the midst of all this chaos, among the calls from lawyers, visits from notaries, growing piles of papers and documents, I made a decision not to sell my father's construction company. He had built it from scratch, with his own hands, investing years of his life, character, reputation into it, and the idea of just getting rid of it all seemed almost like a betrayal to me. Moreover, the business was successful, profitable, with good assets and no debt. Jim, my father's deputy, had worked with him for more than 15 years, was his right hand and knew every detail, every team, every contractor, and my father trusted him as he trusted himself. So I took the obvious and, as it seemed to me, sensible step. I appointed Jim as CEO, retaining full ownership. This allowed me to remain at the helm, but not to be immersed in daily concerns, which I still did not understand. That Tuesday, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was in my apartment, sorting through my father's old papers, bills, letters, blueprints, even childhood drawings of him drawing me fairy tale houses with turrets and gardens, when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, and before opening the door, I looked through the peephole as usual. There she was, standing on the landing, my mother, alone, without a husband, without children, in jeans and a gray sweater, with a worn leather belt, a short haircut that made her look older, and a look in which anxiety and determination were mixed. I opened the door, but didn't take a step back, didn't invite him in. What do you want? I asked, trying to sound firm, although inside, that very feeling that I had learned to suppress was already beginning to boil, a mixture of rage, resentment, and surprise. Can I come in? Please, just for a few minutes, she said, clasping her hands. Against my better judgment, against my will, I stepped aside, let her in, and pointed to the living room. She walked past, looking around, her gaze sliding over the walls, the paintings, the bookshelves, the expensive furniture I'd chosen with the designer. "It's very beautiful here," she said, as if that were a significant point. "How did you know where I live?" I asked. She shrugged, trying to look innocent. "I asked around. Your distant relatives told me on your father's side, of course." Now she was tracking me through people she hadn't spoken to in decades. "What do you want?" I repeated, already knowing that her visit was no accident, and not at all about nostalgia or a desire for reconciliation. She sat down on the sofa without an invitation, as if she still had the right to do so. "Allegra, I know you inherited a lot of money, from your dad, and from your grandma," she said with the cautious gentleness people use when approaching a wild dog they don't know if it's going to bite. I felt my insides tighten, like something in my stomach was slowly twisting into a knot. "How the hell do you know about your grandma's money?" I asked, barely containing my irritation. She didn't answer directly. "You're very well off now. You have everything, a business, real estate, investments. I just think that you should share some of it with your family." I stared at her as if she were something foreign, unfamiliar. "Your family?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "me, and your brothers and sister, the 3 kids you saw at the funeral. They're your half-brothers and sister, Allegra. They need help. Romeo wants to go to college, but we don't have the money. Sarah needs braces, her teeth are so crowded. Matteo, he has learning disabilities, he needs a special teacher." She said it with something emotional, but I didn't believe a word of it, because I knew that if all this were really about children, she would come differently, she would talk differently, she would look differently. I actually laughed, not mockingly, but in the way you laugh when you don't believe what you're hearing, short, nervous. "Are you serious? Are you really saying this? Have you forgotten who I am? What have you done to me?" I came closer, sat down across from her, resting my palms on my knees. "Let me get something straight. You left me when I was 7, you left home, leaving me alone, for 2 days, without food, without an adult. You didn't call, you didn't write, not a single birthday card, not a single letter in 20 years, you disappeared, and now you've come, not because you missed me, not because you wanted to know how I was doing, but because you want money." Her face went pale, trembled for a moment. But she pulled herself together, straightened up, took a defensive posture. "I never loved your father, Allegra. I couldn't live with him anymore, but I knew he'd take care of you. You were always his little princess," she said. "Bullshit," I snapped. "You left because you wanted to run away with your boyfriend, you didn't want to deal with a child, you wanted to start a new life without commitment. If it had been different, you would have fought for me, you would have come to court, but you didn't come, because you didn't care." She didn't answer, she didn't even try, she just sat there, her lips pressed together. "Now that Dad's dead and you find out I inherited his money, you suddenly remember you have a daughter, suddenly you want a relationship, but what you really want is your share, and there's no share. It's not the money," she whispered, but her voice was shaking. "Oh, damn it, it's not the money. You didn't love Dad, but now you love his money so much." I leaned forward, she tried to play on my sympathy. "Allegra, these kids are innocent, they haven't done anything to you. Romeo really wants to go to college, we can't afford it. Sarah needs braces, and Matteo, he needs help. You're their sister." "No, not brothers, these are your children from the man for whom you left us. They are nothing to me." My heart has not responded to any of their names, to any of their requests, and the more you try to impose the idea of kinship on me, the further I feel from you and from them, like random passers-by on the street, whose existence has no meaning in my life. "How can you be so cold?" Her voice trembled, but not from tears, but from helpless irritation. "Cold?" I asked again, looking straight into the eyes of the woman who dared to accuse me of what had long been her own burden. "You want to talk about cold? You left a 7-year-old child alone at home for 2 days, you have not spoken to this child for 20 years, and now you show up and demand money." She stood up, brushing her knees with a gesture, as if trying to shake off the awkwardness, the hurt, the humiliation, but she couldn't, it all stuck to her like glue. "You have millions of dollars, Allegra, you need more than that." "I ask for help with my children's education and their basic needs," I answered her without a pause, without raising my voice. "Because when pain becomes a part of you, you don't shout, you just state it, then ask their father, ask your husband, don't ask the daughter you abandoned. Your father turned you against me." It took me a moment to realize that she meant it, my father never said a bad word to me about you, I said slowly. He didn't have to, your actions spoke for themselves. She fell silent. Her face was somewhere between despair and exhaustion. Maybe she really was tired of being defensive, but that was no excuse. Allegra, please, I'm begging you, just think about it. These kids are struggling, and you could help them with something small compared to what you have. I headed for the door, feeling my insides tighten, like an old scar was starting to bleed again. You know what's funny? I said, putting my hand on the doorknob. You always talk about what a caring mother you are, how you worry about your children's future, but 20 years ago, you cared so little about your child that you left her alone and scared for 2 days. I was young, I made mistakes. She said it like she was talking about a forgotten debt or a missed train, not a life-changing betrayal. I opened the door. I want you to go away, Allegra, please. Go away now. She went to the door, but stopped at the threshold and turned to say over her shoulder, this is not the end, these children deserve better. Yes, they do, I nodded. They deserve a mother who doesn't abandon her children when the going gets tough. After she left, I poured myself a glass of wine, uncorked the bottle with trembling hands, sat on the sofa, hugged my knees, and felt rage, fatigue, and something like amazement fighting inside me. I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. 20 years of nothing, not a letter, not a call, not a crumpled Christmas card, and now she had come to demand her share of what my father, alone, without her, had built from scratch, sacrificing sleep, relationships, his personal life, for me. I thought about those 3 children. I felt sorry for them, honestly. It wasn't their fault that their mother was selfish and their father couldn't seem to provide for them properly, but they weren't my responsibility. I didn't owe them anything. My father had worked tirelessly to build the life we had. After my mother left, he could have broken down, drank, gone broke, disappeared, but instead he chose to live, to build, to fight. He channeled his pain into action. Every dollar he left me was the result of toil, pain, sleepless nights, and difficult decisions, and I wasn't going to let her accuse me of being unfaithful to him. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. A blue envelope with the logo of a law firm I'd never heard of. My fingers shook as I ripped it open, and my heart pounded like a drum. It was a lawsuit. My mother was suing. She wanted half of my father's estate. I immediately dialed David Martinez, the lawyer who had handled my father's affairs for years, the will, the contracts, the agreements. He was the only person I'd trusted since his death. Allegra, I'm so sorry to hear this, he said after I'd forwarded the documents, but don't worry too much. Your mother has no legal claim to any of your father's estate. I was confused, but she's really trying to sue me. Yes, but that doesn't mean she'll win. Anyone can sue. Winning is a whole different thing. We're going to fight. The lawsuit claimed that my mother deserved half the property because she had been married to my father and, as her lawyers claimed, had helped raise me for 7 years. They built a version of her contribution to the family, her emotional and domestic involvement, making her out to be a housewife who had sacrificed her career for the sake of her child. It was a blatant lie, complete nonsense that was impossible to take seriously. But despite this, we had to go through the entire cycle of the trial. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 months later. All this time, I lived as if in a fog, between fear and anger, between amazement and irritation. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I was on edge. I walked into the courtroom with the feeling that all the air in the building had been sucked out, that my every move was under surveillance. My mother was already there, sitting at the opposite table with the lawyer, a skinny guy in an expensive suit who had the look of a smug predator, confident in himself and his strategy. But what struck me most was something else. She brought her husband with her, and all 3 of her children. They sat in the front row, lined up like actors in a custom-made play. Their faces were serious, their eyes sad. They looked at me as if I were a villain, as if I had taken something important from them, as if I had destroyed their dreams and not their mother. Mom's lawyer spoke first, and as soon as he stood up and walked to the stand, I knew what his tone would be: friendly, sympathetic, with a hint of artificial emotion, calculated not so much for the judge as for effect, for the audience, for sympathy that was supposed to grow into legal pity. Your Honor, my client was married to the deceased for 8 years, he began, and I felt my shoulders tense involuntarily. She helped raise his daughter, took care of the house, provided emotional and domestic stability, and although the marriage eventually failed, her contribution should not be forgotten. She deserves her fair share of the common property. Then, without batting an eyelid, he began to tell a fictitious story about how my mother had tried with all her might to maintain a relationship with me after the divorce, how she tried to establish contact, but my father allegedly stood in her way, closing doors, filtering emails, blocking calls. That's when I almost lost control. He spoke of 3 children as a younger generation in dire need of support, of the need for education, a decent life, equal opportunities, and at the same time described me, the heiress to a multimillion-dollar fortune, as a figure who has everything, but who refuses to help her own family. He tried to belittle my independence, to present my father's money as a random gift from heaven, rather than the result of his many years of work. The defendant has inherited millions of dollars that she will never be able to spend in her entire life, he said at the end, as if, in his opinion, I had no reason to refuse. When it was David's turn, he was calm as always, collected, precise, his voice confident, without pathos, with the cold determination of a man who knows that the truth is on his side. He laid copies of the documents on the table, the divorce decree, the custody decision, the paper depriving the mother of parental rights. Your Honor, he began. Without raising his voice, the plaintiff abandoned her 7-year-old daughter, leaving her alone in the house for 2 days while the child's father was on a business trip. She ran off with her lover and never contacted her daughter again. Not a letter, not a phone call, not alimony, not an attempt to re-establish contact. 20 years of silence. Only after her father died and the will was read did she suddenly return and lay claim to an estate that had been entirely built and accumulated by the deceased after her passing. He presented bank statements, phone records, certificates, letters, everything that proved that for 2 decades, my mother had made no attempt to contact me. This is not a case about family values or justice, David said, turning to the judge. This is a case about money, in its most cynical, coldest form. The judge, a woman with expressive eyes and a clear voice, began asking questions, and that's where things got interesting. She turned to my mother and said, Mrs. Williams, why didn't you contact your daughter when she turned 18 and was no longer under her father's legal guardianship? My mother shifted, adjusted her skirt, and something like panic crossed her face. I thought it would be better to let her have a stable life with her father, but now you're here, and you say you wanted to be a part of her life. The judge reminded her. Yes, Your Honor, I always did. Then why did you wait until her father died and she inherited his estate? The lawyer jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. The timing of my client's appeal does not negate her legal rights. I will allow the matter. The judge snapped. My mother looked tense, strained. I learned of the death from relatives and decided that it was time to reconnect. The judge clearly did not believe her. Mrs. Williams, why have you not provided any financial support to your daughter for the past 20 years? But now you think she should support you? My mother tried to speak, but she could not. Her lips opened and closed again, like a fish washed up on the shore. And why? The judge continued. Should the court award you half of the estate that was created by a man after you abandoned the family? That's when my mother lost her composure. She stood up abruptly, her chair creaked on the floor, and she screamed without holding back. She doesn't need all this money. She's alone. No one cares about her. She's selfish and cold, like her father. A silence hung in the courtroom, ringing, tense, like before a thunderstorm. Even her own children, sitting in the front row, looked down as if ashamed. I sat motionless, but I felt as if I had been struck, an unexpected, stinging slap in the face with words. After all she had already done, now she was accusing me, of selfishness, of coldness, of loneliness of my own making. The judge banged her gavel. Mrs. Williams, sit down and pull yourself together. The lawyer rushed to calm her down, whispering quickly, but the damage had been done, and everyone could see it. The judge paused, looked over the papers again, looked around the room, lingered on my mother, then turned her gaze to me. I find no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim, she said. The defendant inherited this property under a valid will from her father, who had every legal right to dispose of his assets as he saw fit. The plaintiff abandoned her parental responsibilities 20 years ago and made no attempt to take part in her daughter's life until she learned of this inheritance. Then she paused and looked straight at my mother. Moreover, I believe that the defendant should consider herself fortunate in some way to have been abandoned by such a mother, since, in my opinion, She deserved a much better childhood and a better family than the plaintiff could have provided. My mother's face turned as white as a wall, and the lawyer sighed. As if realizing that it was all over, he tried to say something, to object, but the judge had already raised her hand. The case is dismissed, all legal costs will be awarded to the defendant. As we left the courtroom, my mother, overcome with anger and humiliation, pushed aside her lawyer, who tried in vain to calm her down, and, coming too close, stood right in front of me, so close that I could feel her breath on my face, hot as from under the lid of a boiling kettle, and she hissed with such desperate venom that my fingers went cold. "This is not over, you will regret this." David stepped between us with lightning-fast determination, saying coldly and clearly, "Madam, you need to step away from my client immediately." And at that moment her husband finally came up to her, confused, looking around nervously, as if he didn't believe that all this was really happening, and, carefully taking her by the elbow, began to lead her away. But she still didn't take her eyes off me, and pure, undisguised hatred splashed in her eyes, thick as soot, caustic as vinegar. I thought that this would be the end of it, that now she would disappear, as she had once disappeared, forever. I was wrong. A week later, she somehow got hold of my phone number, and it began. First the calls, endless, intrusive, aggressive, then the messages, text after text, one crazier than the other, where she accused me of ruining her life, then claimed that I had stolen the future from her children, then cursed me, threatening me with God's judgment and the retribution that I supposedly had to bear. I blocked the number, but she bought new phones again and again, and each time it was a new number, a new stream of accusations and threats, and soon it stopped being just obsession, it became stalking. And then one day she showed up at my office. My dad's construction company had a modern office downtown, a big, bright building with a marble lobby and a reception desk, and that day, amid the usual bustle of a weekday morning, I heard a noise, tense voices, rustling sounds, muffled exclamations, and went out to see what was going on. She was standing in the middle of the hall, her head held high, her eyes full of fury, and all three of her children were next to her, looking tired and embarrassed, as if they knew they were in a situation where they didn't belong. "I want to see Allegra," she shouted at the receptionist, pointing at me as if I were the criminal. "That's my daughter, and she abandoned her family." The poor girl behind the desk was panicking, unsure of what to say, and then I stepped forward, trying to remain calm even though I was shaking with tension inside. "You need to leave," I said firmly. "These kids are hungry," she shouted back, waving her arms. "You have millions, and they're starving because you're selfish." People stopped, employees from their offices peered into the hallway, some took pictures on their phones, some just stood there with their mouths open. The kids stood back, as if trying to be invisible, and I saw shame in their eyes. Security came quickly and politely, but firmly escorted her out of the building. But the damage had already been done, the rumors, the questions, the whispers behind her back. I felt terribly awkward, hurt, and unfair. This building had been built for years, my father had raised it up as a symbol of success, and she had turned it into a public circus. That's when I called David again. "We need a restraining order," I said. "I was hoping it wouldn't come to that, but I think you were right." He filed the next day. We had to go back to court, this time for a different case, before a different judge. A woman in her 50s with a look on her face that said she'd seen it all and wasn't surprised by anything anymore. "Your Honor," David began, "my client is being stalked by her biological mother, who isn't just violating her privacy, but threatening her and interfering with her work by creating scenes in her workplace." He presented all the evidence, text message transcripts, call logs from dozens of numbers, statements from security and staff, surveillance footage of mom screaming in the lobby. The mother's lawyer tried to paint her as a woman desperate to reconnect with her daughter, but the judge didn't buy it. "Mrs. Williams," she said, looking straight at Mom, "you lost your lawsuit against your daughter. That should have been the end of it. Instead, you started stalking her, causing public scandals, interfering in her life. She's my daughter." Mom screamed, "I have a right to talk to her." "You gave up that right 20 years ago when you abandoned her," the judge replied with icy calm, "and you have no right to stalk her, much less threaten her." The judge signed a restraining order. Mom was not allowed anywhere near me, my home, my office, or within 500 yards of me. She could not call me, text me, or try to contact me through third parties. "If you violate this order, Mrs. Williams, you will be arrested and held in contempt of court," do you understand? Mom didn't say anything, she just looked at me, straight at me. From across the courtroom, her husband's head was down, his face ashen, the children looked confused and upset, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for them, almost. That was 6 months ago, I haven't heard from her since, I don't know if she still lives there, or if the children are okay, and frankly, I don't want to know. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty for not helping these kids, because they are innocent. They say they didn't choose their mother, and that's true, they didn't do anything wrong, but neither did I. I didn't ask to be abandoned when I was 7. I didn't ask my mother to disappear from my life for 20 years and then come back. Demanding money, love, understanding, and forgiveness all rolled into one. My father worked tirelessly to build the life we had. After my mother left, he could have broken down, but instead, he channeled all the pain, all the disappointment, all the rage into his work, into his business, into caring for me, and every dollar he left was not a lucky break, not a lottery ticket, but the price of his labor, his sleepless nights, his unexpressed pain. I'm not going to give this to the woman who threw me away like trash, not because she couldn't do otherwise, not because she was a victim of circumstances or misunderstanding, but because it was more convenient for her, because on one side of the scale there was freedom, passion, a new life, and on the other there was me, a 7-year-old girl in pajamas with a bear, and she didn't choose me. Sometimes, in rare moments of doubt, I allow myself to imagine how everything could have been if she had behaved differently, if she had come to my father's funeral not with complaints and accusations, but with quiet repentance. With a sincere desire to talk, to hug, to ask for forgiveness, even if not in words, but with a look, a gesture, if she had invited me for coffee to tell me about what she felt then, what made her leave, and maybe explain why she never tried to come back, if she had simply acknowledged what she had done to me and tried to make amends, not even with money, with attention, time, concern, maybe something in me would have moved. Maybe I would not have been as cold and impenetrable as I had learned to be for the sake of survival, but she did none of that. She saw the amount, heard the word inheritance, and her eyes flashed not with tears but with dollar signs. Her interest in me was not a sudden awakening of maternal instinct but an attempt to remind herself and others that she, too, was entitled. She felt she could show up 2 decades later and demand a piece of what the man she hated so much that she abandoned his child had created. She felt entitled, but she wasn't. Sometimes I think about those children, Romeo, Sarah, Matteo. I hope they are doing well. I hope they get an education that will allow them to find themselves, to learn to choose differently than their mother. I hope they grow up to be better people, free of anger, manipulation, and greed. But as sad as it may sound, they are not my responsibility. I do not have to answer for the consequences of other people's decisions. I do not have to make up for what their own father or mother did not give them. My duty is to honor the memory of my father, the man who did not run away, did not abandon, but stayed, no matter what. He wanted me to have stability, security, respect for myself and my name. He left me everything because he knew I would do the right thing. I kept the construction business afloat, despite all the external difficulties, despite the internal struggle with the past. Jim turned out to be an excellent CEO. He ran things clearly, efficiently, with the same care that my father treated each project with. We did not just hold on, we grew, entered new markets, concluded new contracts, expanded horizons. I invested the rest of the money wisely, in real estate, in investment funds, in projects that were interesting and important to me. I travel when I want, but not for show. I like to be invisible, to live comfortably, without hanging myself with gold chains or loud titles. Now I am dating a man. His name is Vincenzo. He is a teacher. And what is especially valuable is that he does not know about my inheritance in detail. He does not care how much I have in my account. He loves me for my smile, for the way I read poetry before going to bed, for my conversations about business, for my morning habits, and for the way I am silent. My father would have liked him. He is honest, kind, calm, a man who builds, not destroys, does not seek profit, but seeks meaning. He does not run from difficulties, does not hide the truth. He is reliable. I think about my dad every day. Once a month I go to the cemetery, to his grave, bring fresh flowers, sit on the bench next to him and tell him what's going on, new projects, Vincenzo, how I'm coping. I know he can't hear me, doesn't answer, but it helps me feel connected, to hold on to the thread that runs through everything. Sometimes, in the evenings, the big house gets especially quiet. This house is huge, and it was clearly designed as a space for a family. Maybe one day Vincenzo and I will fill it with voices, footsteps, the laughter of children. Dad would love that. As for my mother, I hardly think about her anymore. She's a name on paper, a blurry face in my memories, a figure from a dream I stopped having long ago. We shared DNA, but that's it. Real family isn't just about genes. Family is the ones who are there when you fall, the ones who stay when others leave, the ones who build with you, not tear you down. Real family doesn't abandon you at 7 and then show up 20 later, demanding payments. My dad was my real family, my grandma was my real family, maybe Vincenzo will be that kind of support someday. The restraining order is still in effect. I keep it in a drawer with other important papers, but I don't think I'll need it anymore. I think my mother has finally realized that I'm not her retirement plan. I'm not angry anymore. There were times when anger burned inside me, turning memories into coal, but anger is exhausting. She is empty, she eats away at my soul. Now I feel nothing when I think about her. Emptiness is a feeling too, but at least there is no pain in it. She has no meaning for my life. I have things to do, a business, relationships, a future. I have to run the company that my father put his heart and soul into. I have to build something that did not start from scratch, but continues to grow. I have to build relationships with those who are close to me and build my future. That is what is truly important. Sometimes people tell me, you have to forgive her, that you can't carry a grudge inside you, it's harmful. But I don't carry a grudge, I just take care of myself. I just don't let a person into my life who has proven that he cannot be trusted. There is a difference between forgiveness and naivety. I forgave her a long time ago, for myself, for my peace of mind, but to forgive does not mean to let her back. To forgive does not mean to give her the key to the house. To forgive does not mean to give her the money that my father earned with sweat and pain. Write a comment what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.